Welcome to F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans. I'm your host as always, Terry, and I'm here to keep you up to date with all of the unbiased, hard-hitting Formula 1 news. So grab your favourite mug of coffee, sit down, strap in and get yourself comfortable to join in the conversation. Because this is F1 Coffee Corner. This is Full Beans, the must-have podcast for all Formula 1 fans. Welcome to this week's episode of F1 Coffee Corner, Full Beans the podcast. I'm your host as always, Terry, and wow, what an episode we have got, because the world of Formula 1, certainly off the track, has just exploded with rumour, with gossip, with counter-arguments, with investigations, with lack of investigations, with WhatsApp messages. Oh my, what a weekend. So we're going to unpack all we can on this show today, and we're also going to have a look back at the opening race of the season at Bahrain, and also from a personal point of view, my experience with Williams for their race day experience, which some of you may find useful if you're thinking about doing one of these. So with all that in mind, if you haven't already, don't forget, hit subscribe, hit like, hit follow. You'll be notified when these episodes dropped. It will help me with the rankings, and it will all be good. So without further ado, grab the coffee, let's sit down, strap in, and give this week's episode some full beans. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with Bahrain, round one of a record 24 races. And let's start with certainly the on-track action. We're going to cover all of the off-track stuff. It feels like that should have its own separate podcast going on at the moment. But we're going to concentrate on what happened on the track and what happened Saturday evening in Bahrain, because obviously with the start of Ramadan next week, the first two races this weekend in Jeddah is the same. They've all been brought forward to Saturday, which was a bit unusual. But yeah, there we have it. So we won't go through all of the practice, all the qualifying. You've all seen it. You all know what happened. The inevitable happened. Max Verstappen once again started the race on pole position. Complained a bit during the actual practice about gear shifts, about setup. Typical Red Bull, typical Max. I like to liken him to Lewis, and Lewis moaned about his tyres. Max seems to moan in free practice on occasion about the setup of the car, but when it comes to that moment, when it comes to that time to deliver, he does exactly that, the same as Lewis used to. Maybe it's just his way of just extracting optimum performance from that Red Bull, or maybe it's just frustrations that he puts on the radio. But either way, he started from pole position. So let's have a look back at the race results, the winners, the losers, and just what can we expect coming up in Formula 1. We know that we've got Jeddah this weekend coming. We know there is a lot of off-track stuff that needs to be unpacked and also needs some clarification on. So we're going to do a bit of that as well. So starting off with the race results, we go 1 and 2 together. Red Bull 1 and 2, Max Verstappen the winner, Sergio Perez in second place. What can I say? Max Verstappen, absolutely commanding performance. He was out of DRS after lap 1. He never looked like he was in any trouble whatsoever. It was a very comfortable race for him in the RB20. It was, I'm not going to say easy, because Formula 1 isn't easy, but what it was a very big benchmark, a very big statement. Like I say, he pulled out of DRS from Charles literally after lap 1. We know that DRS is now activated after lap 1. It did not matter. That Ferrari was not close enough after that. So Max started where he left off pretty much, looked comfortable, looked at ease, looked like he wasn't pushing to the limit with that RB20, still got performance to come. Very similar story to last year in terms of the RB19. And yeah, Sergio Perez coming back through the pack to finish second place. They will be happy at that Red Bull 1 and 2. That's what they wanted, is what they probably needed with what's going on off the track. It was certainly a statement to everybody else. We know that a lot of people have been talking about the fact that what's going on off track and it affected it on track, the design changes that they made with the RB20, taking inspiration from competitors. Adrian Newey even alluded to that during the notes that you get in terms of the upgrade list, openly saying we got our inspiration from our competitors for this car. So interested to see where it goes. I don't think they were pushed enough. We'll come on to why in a minute. So I'm not sure if that gap is true compared to last year, or whether or not it was masked a bit by the other team's inability to close that gap. But even so, I think that this weekend in Saudi Arabia is probably going to give us a better idea of just how far ahead the Red Bull is, because it's clearly at the front. Now the question is, how far is that gap? Is that gap the same? Is it less? Or actually is it more than what we first anticipated? And that's certainly what the team's going to be looking forward to. With Saudi Arabia giving us a very different proposition to what Bahrain gave us. Now, in terms of third place, Carlos Sainz in third place, getting a much-needed podium for himself. This is what we're going to see from Carlos. Elbows out, wasn't prepared to play the team game. Why would he, is my question to anybody watching this or anyone listening to this on the podcast. He's been hung out to dry by Ferrari. He has no future. He has no contract. And I don't mean he has no future in the sense that he's not going to get one. What I mean is at this current moment in time, he has no future. So therefore, Carlos Sainz is fighting for his Formula One life. He's fighting for his drive. He's fighting for where he ends up next year. He's not going to play second fiddle to Charles in any way whatsoever. He's, in fact, when it comes to team orders, you're probably going to get a bit of kickback from it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what are they going to do? They can't fire him. They're already doing that. So I would not be surprised to see this from Carlos this season, this very individualised approach, which may just hamper Ferrari going forward because they're not going to have a teammate for Charles they can rely on in that sense. So, whereas in the past they might have got a bit of, understanding, a bit of help from Carlos. That's not going to happen this year. So really interested to see. But obviously we know that Charles had these issues. We'll come on to Charles in a minute. But once Carlos got back in, he didn't look in any doubt. I don't think he was ever going to trouble Perez. I think Perez was quite clearly managing his pace with Carlos on the different compound tyres at the end. Checo was on the soft tyres, he was protecting him. Carlos was obviously on the hard tyres, had much more grip, had much more life. However, I do think Checo had enough in bag to actually, counteract that should he needed to. So good result from Carlos. He'll be happy with that. Ferrari will be happy with a podium, but I think they wanted to take the fight to Red Bull a little bit more, if I'm honest. Charles Leclerc, I joked in my video he had brake assist left on, like on the F1 24 game. He certainly had some problems in that first stint with that braking problem, caused him to go off track multiple times, slowing corners, losing lots of pace. It was an issue that seemed to correct itself on probably about halfway through the second stint, so I'm not sure whether or not the tyre change did something or whether or not they made an adjustment during the pit stop or even remotely made a difference. But certainly with his performance in terms of the issues he had, he will be happy that he managed to get fourth place. That's for sure, because at one point I thought he was going to slip all the way back down the pack and lose all that good hard work he done. Once again, proving in qualifying on Friday that he's got raw pace in that Ferrari. Have they got the tyre deg under control? It's too early to tell. This weekend is going to give us a much better idea. But I do think they have got a car that's going to be able to compete. And I do think they are probably the closest competitors to Red Bull currently, apart from Red Bull themselves, which we'll go into. But both Ferraris will be happy with third and fourth, especially considering problems. They couldn't have asked for more than that. I think the Red Bull would have beaten them on raw pace anyway last weekend. So, definitely a good one. George Russell, fifth place for him. We heard about all sorts of problems from that normally reliable Mercedes engine. So, we often comment about how bulletproof that Mercedes engine is, and all we seem to get was problems up and down the grid. I'll go on through McLaren and Williams and Aston Martin later on. But Mercedes, they're saying that they chose the wrong cooling settings. They're saying they chose the wrong bodywork. It's a bit of a rookie mistake if that's the case. I think something on that engine was abnormal for this race, for these conditions. It wasn't particularly hot. In Bahrain, in the evening race, it wasn't like a major temperature problem at all compared to what we've had in testing and what we've had previous years and what we've had in the past couple of days with free practice and qualifying. So I'm not quite sure how Mercedes got it completely wrong. I think they were aggressive with their setup. We saw flames coming out of George's car during one of the free practice sessions, and we saw Lewis driving that Mercedes extremely close to the ground, putting probably as much wear as he can on that plank. So I think they were definitely playing with a setup that was aggressive. I think that's probably what's paid the price for them, if I'm honest. I've got no doubt they're sorted for this weekend. I've got no doubt they will. They can't afford to lose what they did. George was saying he was losing sort of 4/10, I think it was at one point, because of that issue. Again, fifth place kind of feels right to where Mercedes probably are anyway, if I'm honest. So I think George will be happy to do that. He probably would have wanted to get closer to Charles Leclerc, who had these problems. I think if Mercedes didn't have the problems, they might have got closer. But then I think if Charles didn't have his problems, that lead and that gap might have stayed the same. So I'm not too sure actually if Mercedes with a problem-free car, if Charles had a problem-free Ferrari, whether or not Mercedes would have been able to close that gap and get closer or not. But it remains to be seen. Lando Norris in sixth place. We do both McLaren together, Oscar in 8th, because they had quite a similar race. Nothing spectacular. After Bahrain last year, they'd be happy with that. Their pace was better. They knew it's a track, it's kind of like a bogey track to them. I do wonder if they turn the engine down based on what was happening with all of the other Mercedes engines. So I wonder if there was a precaution measure to turn it down. I think they're in a comfortable position to be able to do that quite easily. I don't think that they suffered in any way from that. They looked in control. I think Oscar will be a little bit disappointed. He had a slow second stop, which enabled Lewis to get ahead of him. So I think he'd be a bit disappointed with that one, to be honest. But yeah, all in all, when you take Bahrain last year and where McLaren were and where they are now, I think they certainly take that. They're talking about 3 major steps in terms of the upgrades for their car for this season. So they seem to be on a pathway. They seem to have a distinct plan with this new structure they've got in place, and they seem to be sticking to it. I think we'll see more of them in Saudi Arabia this weekend compared to what we did in Bahrain. So I'm expecting them to possibly jump above the Mercedes, but not quite enough to beat the Ferraris. So I think they'll be there or thereabouts, but I still think it'll be Red Bull, Ferrari, and then I think we're going to see certainly McLaren coming into their own a bit, or certainly I hope so, because that will show they've made the step up in development that they should have done over the winter period. Lewis Hamilton, a bit of a nothing race for him. Didn't really gain much position from where he started the race. Didn't really he didn't really do a lot, did he? I mean, that's going to sound really bad, isn't it, when this podcast comes out? But, he had the problems with the car. He broke his seat. He had the engine problems. He lost his battery at one point. I think it's just one of them races where, he just wants to get on to Saudi Arabia to show what this Mercedes can do. I don't think we've seen the full potential of it. I don't think it's a championship winning car. I think it might sneak a few wins on certain tracks. A bit like the Ferrari and the McLaren have got the possibility, but I don't think by any stretch of imagination, from what I've seen from the W15, it's a championship winning car, that's for sure. We've got Fernando Alonso, Lance Stroll, 9th and 10th. Those two will certainly, they will take that. All the talk last year was obviously about how Aston Martin developed their car, how over the winter they made that big gap. This year they've gone about it quietly. 9th and 10th compared to what a podium last year for Fernando probably represents a step back. I think they knew they were going to struggle. They have changed a lot on that car. They've obviously taken the rear suspension from Mercedes and the new gearbox from Mercedes. Again, I wonder if they had to turn their engine down. We've not heard anything either way. I'm not sure Mercedes will be publicising that if they did have to do that, but it would make sense that they did do that based on what was happening with Williams and what was happening with Mercedes themselves. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see if Aston Martin turned that down. Lance Stroll did really well after his early incident to come back up and get last of the points. I think, again, we're going to be expecting more from them in Jeddah. I think they got too much drag to be a team which potentially wins the race, but I think they'll be up there or thereabouts. Certainly alongside Mercedes, certainly alongside that pack in the middle there. But hey, it remains to be seen. Compared to last year, it's, I suppose, on paper a step back, but I think it's where Aston Martin currently are with their development plan. They need to do something a bit different this year. It kind of reminded me of last year, when they were in the middle of the season, they didn't quite know what they were doing. So hopefully they can sort it out pretty quick and get moving back up to where they belong. Then we had Joe in 11th place in the Kick Sauber, as it's officially called on the F1 app. Quite a surprise to have him up there. I was expecting the V-Carb cars to be up there, if I'm being honest, rather than Joe. Really good performance from him. A lot of new stuff on that Stake F1 Kick Sauber, whatever we're calling it, car. Valtteri will come on to had a bit of a mare of a weekend, but Joe quietly plugged away, did well. It didn't really look like he was going to Stroll for the points, being a lap down. So it's one of those where I think they will take the much needed information they got. They will be pleased that Joe was in a performance where he was at the top in terms of the rest of the pack. And I think they will take that as a positive going into Saudi Arabia. I think they might struggle a bit in Saudi Arabia with just raw pace. I'm expecting a little bit more from the V-Carb boys. But it depends on them when they get it set up or not. But promising from Stake F1, a lot of people are expecting him to be right at the back of the grid alongside Haas, and that's not the case at all. Coming on to Haas, nicely inside. Did you see that? What a lovely link that was. Kevin Magnussen, P12. Haas will be delighted with that. We saw Komatsu talking about the start of the season, being at the back of the grid, talking about coming back through, talking about actually, we're going to have to learn because of our tyre deg was really poor. 12th place will be absolutely delightful for them. They had a really good qualifying with Nico Hulkenberg. We've seen this before with Hasso. They can't seem to just turn that one pace into race pace. It's their biggest Achilles heel. It has been for quite a while now. That Ferrari engine performing well over one lap, but then the main Ferrari team is suffering from it. And as a customer team taking so many parts from Ferrari, is it any surprise that they're in that same position? I don't think so whatsoever. But like I say, a really positive start to Komatsu's reign as Haas, and they will certainly be happy with that ahead of the Racing Bulls and ahead of the Alpine. So they will certainly be taking that result, that's for sure. Then we've got the two Racing Bulls. Oh, I've called them Racing Bulls here. I'm only calling them VCARB. There you go. VCARB, Racing Bulls, whatever you want to call them. Let's call them Visa, Castrap, RB. Let's go by their official name. Daniel Ricciardo in 13th and Yuki Tsunoda in 14th. And my word, what is going on with those radio messages? So for those who don't know, Daniel pitted on his last stint, had the faster soft tyres. Yuki had the slower tyres. Daniel's initial pace was faster, as it would be on the soft tyres. Yuki was asked to let him pass. He said no. By the time he let Daniel pass, Daniel had lost that advantage that you get from having the soft tyres, and it all got a bit sort of, a little bit frosty in the VCARB garage, that's for sure, with after the race, Daniel calling Yuki immature. I don't think we've heard the end of it. I think this is a classic case of Yuki not feeling appreciated. There's a new team boss, there's a new team in place. All of this talk about Daniel Ricciardo replacing Checo, if you're Yuki, who's been there supporting the team, who's been there, race after race, season after season, okay, part of the Honda deal, let's be all honest about it. However, he's been the one who's been there and probably been consistently scoring points. And I think he's potentially a little bit upset that Daniel's getting all this attention when Daniel has come back into the VCARB team, he actually hasn't proven why he should have a Red Bull seat yet. So I think that's probably where this is. I think it's underlying. I think it needs nipping in the bud. I think that they need to talk about this. They did say they had already commented on the strategy beforehand and that this was going to be the case. If that's the case, he just basically didn't follow any team orders, which is bad place to be in for a team, especially on race one. I would debate over whether or not it was the right thing to do because ultimately they were well out the points. And I'm not sure with Daniel's gain in performance and lap times, whether or not he had enough to actually get anywhere near sort of strolling the points anyway. So I kind of feel like maybe they should just let it play out and not push the issue. But I also feel they were proving a point by pushing the issue, if that makes sense. Right. Alex Albon, Williams. We're obviously at the Williams factory. Really disappointing result for the team. They're expecting a lot more, obviously, from what they were talking about before the race with us and from what we've seen previously. Lots of problems with the engine. Lots of problems with Logan we'll come on to with brake bias settings and the new steering wheel. Ironically, they've all made this big thing that Williams have now taken a steering wheel screen off the chassis and put it on the steering wheel. And the first race, they have a mare and Logan Sargent has to change it. So, hey, maybe they should change it back. But all joking aside, really disappointing. They'll be hoping to bounce back better. The FW46, is a car that's got a lot of difference on it. They haven't got the new suspension the Mercedes have given out in terms of the push rod. They're still on the old pull rod system. But they have got a car that they've had longer to develop it in the wind tunnel and they think is capable of a lot more. So I think it's one of those weekends just going to have to write off for Williams fans, unfortunately. You've got Hulkenberg in 16th, obviously had that early incident during the race, was never looking like he's going to get any points after that. And apart from his absolutely stunning qualifying performance lap, it'd be a weekend for him to forget, that's for sure. And the Haas guys need to be careful because one of them, I think, is certainly under threat as the season goes on. So at the moment, they're fine score-wise, with Kevin obviously in 12th. But I think they're just conscious that actually they need to score points, they need to get on the board. But I don't think they're as bad as what was previously alluded to during testing. Then we've got the Alpine team of Ocon and Gasly, and they are a team in trouble, aren't they? We joked about it at the beginning of the season that, they're at the back, they need to do better. We talked about how that their performance was really bad. It is really bad. Technical director quitting, head of aerodynamics quitting, or before the race itself, currently serving out their notice, being replaced by people internally, which normally means you're plugging a gap rather than going out and getting them. That talk that I said last year in July time when Otmar left of Alpine being sold to Andretti kind of doesn't look so far-fetched now, does it? Because they've got some problems. We'll talk on about their new structure in the next part of the show. But they're going to have a long season. They haven't got the people to turn it around at the moment. They haven't got the development path to turn it around at the moment, and they haven't got the pace in their engines to turn it around at the moment. So I'm really struggling for any positives for Alpine fans currently, apart from you just have to hang in there and hope that somewhere along the line something unlocks, because at the moment they're looking like a shadow of the team they were, and getting off the back end of the grid is probably going to be their main aim, let alone challenging towards the top like the Renault board want them to. So I think that's going to place some interesting dynamics on not only the team, but also what Renault decide to do full stop in terms of the sport. Concord agreement coming up next year for renegotiation. Once you sign it, you're committed. I think Alpine might be having a look at that. I think Andretti might be worth a cheeky phone call, that's for sure. Valtteri Bottas in 19th place had that 1 minute pit stop, was always going to struggle after that. Issue with the lock and nut it looked like going on, just a complete disaster for him. Again, he will be disappointed to seeing Joe do so well and him doing so bad in that stake F1 car. So I expected more from Valtteri this weekend in Jeddah. I think he needs a good performance somewhere along the line. We haven't seen the Valtteri of old for a while, and I think somewhere along the line he needs to produce that performance. So I'm really intrigued to see how Valtteri reacts to this, especially with the spectre of Carlos looming in the background, that's for sure. So yeah, expect more from Valtteri this weekend. And Logan Sargent in 20th place, like I said, had an issue, had a brake bias problem causing him to go off, had to change the steering wheel. It's just going to be a weekend to forget for Williams. They'll just be looking forward to next weekend and hopefully eradicating exactly what went in Bahrain and just starting their season afresh from there. But yeah, all in all, that is your roundup of the Bahrain Grand Prix. Let me know what your highlights were. Like I say, I think that with the problems that the chasing pack had, it's hard to see whether or not that gap to Red Bull has come down or whether or not it's the same as what it was. I think we know more this weekend when we get full-blown cars without any issues on it. Very unusual to see Mercedes struggling like they were. I think that meant the other Mercedes engines got turned down. It kind of makes sense they would have, because it was affecting more than just Mercedes. So I would imagine there was a message sent out to say turn the setting down, which kind of explains some performance in there as well. So yeah, really looking forward to this weekend. I will be on the Fantasy Formula live stream again 1 hour before deadline to lock your Fantasy Formula picks in. That's on Friday, which is 4 p.m. UK time. So if you do want to get the latest info on what's going on track, get latest in terms of your Fantasy Formula 1 teams, head on over to FanAmp on YouTube, have a look at that one, check that one out, hit the subscribe button for them as well. And that is your Bahrain round. Right, Williams race day experience. So for those who follow my page, you'll know that we booked a evening with the Heritage guys for Williams Formula 1 team. So that was a tour around the museum, a look inside the Heritage Works, and a sit-down meal at the factory in Grove. Now that was unfortunately cancelled, and we were offered the chance to upgrade our tickets to the race day experience that Williams do on quite a number of events this year. Now, this has increased in price from last year. It's now £300 tickets, so it is quite expensive. It is at the top end. Red Bull's exactly the same for their race training ones, to put it into comparison. So it is a marked increase. Last year, I think it was about 150, and then for races which they knew they could draw a crowd, went up to about sort of 200, 250. So £300 is a marked increase on it. So what do you get from a Williams race day experience? So you get to spend all day there. So we arrived at 10 a.m. Now we were there 10 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. with the race obviously at 3 p.m. So you get a lot of time there. Unfortunately, it's not enough, which is crazy. So we arrived at Grove. We went to the experience centre. We went in. We were met with bacon and sausage rolls, tea and coffee, juice, all of those sort of things, introduced to the team, shown around the sort of where we were sat, where we were based, and then we were told what the plan was for the day. So what you get from a Williams race experience is you get access to the esports. So upstairs was obviously Bahrain. There's a competition being run for the fastest lap on that one, but you have basically unlimited access to it. You could go and spend as much time on the actual esports sims as you wanted to. They also had a giant scale electric track, which again had a competition. Now Dad won that one. He won an amazing prize actually. So Dad's got the fastest lap on the scale electrics, misspent youth quite clearly on that one, and got a pair of recycled sunglasses made out of recycled material. He got some key rings, wristband. He also got a Alex Albon mini helmet, which for those who collect those will know they're actually really expensive. So he was well chuffed for that one. So I'm guessing the other competitions had the same prize bag as what that one did. Obviously, we didn't see them because I didn't win anything. But yeah, from that point of view, that was done on there. Then you had a tour, so you were put into 3 groups and you were told to meet at the reception, and then you got a tour around all of the old Williams cars. Now, bear in mind, this collection is second only to Ferrari. Didn't have enough time in there. I could have spent all day in there, honestly. Literally all of the cars from all of the ages. Ayrton Senna's car there. I've done a video on that one. Quite emotional to see Ayrton's car there. Not that when he had to crash in Imola, but certainly it was from the race before. Obviously knowing that his last cars were Williams cars. Quite a nice tribute to him that they had in there. And yeah, just going through the heritage and the evolution and how the cars have changed, and the story about how Sir Frank Williams got his first sponsor. 6-wheel car that never made the track was really interesting. Seeing, forgetting about the Winfield red Williams that we saw. Then, of course, we had the BMW era of Williams. So, for me, growing up, Williams were quite a dominant team. They were up there as, one of the best. So to look around those cars, you got the Adrian Newey phase where you could clearly see Adrian Newey's influence on these cars. It was a really good experience. Like I said, didn't have enough time. It's something I want to go up and do again. I certainly think that's worth doing as a separate entity, that's for sure. Then we came back in. Then we had a talk for about an hour, which was the team giving us an update on Bahrain, so the track, tyre strategy, some info about seating positions, steering wheels, a bit about Williams, a bit about expectations for the season, some video messages from the team. So yeah, that was quite a good hour. And they had a quiz on there. So they had all these things where you could take part, so you could do these things. Then they also they opened it up for dinner then. So at dinner time, basically, we had it was Bahrain local food. Obviously not from Bahrain because we were in Oxford, but you know what I mean. That was the theme, I should say. So we had that, and you could watch that while you had the sort of TV on the background with Sky Sports. And what I will say, the experience of watching it was better than Red Bull's in terms of the seating. So they've got this theatre style seating with these little trays on the side, with 3 screens up above. We had the main feed. We had a pit feed in terms of the map, which was really good. And then we also had the live timing screen as well on the left. So for someone like me, it made for really good watching to see everything. That timing screen is awesome. I wish we could have that. It literally showed the gap between each car. It was a GPS map. It was really interesting. And I'd say, so we had that. And then after sort of lunch, we then went straight into the Grand Prix and watched it there. Then afterwards was just a roundup of the competition winners before we went home. So that's what you got. Things I will say is a paid bar, not a free bar, which I think for £300 was a little disappointing. When we did the one at Red Bull, it wasn't a paid bar, it was a free bar. So I think that made a little bit of a difference in terms of just finance. I think if you're charging a premium of £300 for a hospitality package, you should probably include the drinks into that as well, would be my little bit of feedback from it. Didn't have the team kit in the shop, which they apologised for, but gave us the voucher for. It just hadn't arrived there. Obviously, I'd already got mine anyway, so it wasn't too much of an issue. But I think, some people were a little bit disappointed at that one as well. And there was no sort of live feed to the drivers or to anything like that. So I think that was another bit which potentially they could have done better on. But all in all, it was a really good experience. It was great to see it from a factory. It was great to see what was going on. It was great to see it with the live screens on there and get a view of what they were doing. So it's something I think is definitely worth doing. Like I say, it is at the pricier end, £300. I appreciate that not a lot of people have that sort of money to spare, so it might price some people out. But if you do get the opportunity, I would say go and take it. The team there were amazing. They're really, really friendly, really welcoming. Talked a lot about the history of Williams, talked a lot about where they're going, talked a lot about the vision that James Vowles has got. So, yeah, some really good stuff in there in terms of that. So definitely recommend going. I'll definitely do it again, and I definitely want to do that museum tour again without all of the other stuff and just do the museum tour because those cars looked absolutely amazing. So with that in mind, let's come on to the news because there's quite a bit of that, isn't there? Okay, the news. I don't even know where to start with this one. Let's start with Mohammed Ben Sulayem. So we got announced yesterday that Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president, is under investigation for allegedly trying to interfere with a result of a Formula One Grand Prix. That Grand Prix is Saudi Arabia 2023, and it relates to Fernando Alonso's penalty. And what the allegation is from a whistleblower to the compliance officer who submitted his report to the ethics committee for them to investigate. And what that is, in essence, is the whistleblower is saying that Mohammed Ben Sulayem used his influence to ring up the FIA representative who was basically working at the track at the time to assert his influence that that decision should be overturned and that Fernando's penalty should not stand and he should regain his podium position. A couple of things worth mentioning here. Number one, whether or not Fernando's penalty should have been upheld or overturned is kind of irrelevant in this. And I think a lot of people are missing that. What this is if you've got any evidence of the FIA president interfering with the results of a Formula 1 Grand Prix, he has to go. It's pure and simple. The FIA are there to be impartial, they're there to be independent, they're there to be referees, they're there to implement the rules, not to be influenced by an individual. It literally damages the whole integrity of the sport if this is the case. And that is what this investigation is. It's not whether or not Fernando's penalty should have been overturned. It's not whether or not we agree that Aston Martin's case, which was very comprehensive, was actually true. It's whether or not there is evidence that the FIA president sought to change that result by asserting his authority on the stewards making that decision. That's what this is all about. Because if that's the case, he has to go. It's very simple. You cannot have an FIA president using his own personal agenda. Whether or not he's right, whether or not he's wrong is completely irrelevant. He's not a steward. He's not a decision maker. He can have a conversation afterwards about it. They can look at it afterwards to see if there's any learnings from it. But if at any point, either through a third party or directly himself, he made that call, he needs to go. And it's as simple as that. And that's what this investigation is. We're being told 4 to 6 weeks by the ethics committee. We're being told that's how long it's going to take for them to look at it. And that's the question. Did he voice an opinion to a colleague? If that's the case, there's nothing kind of... There is, but there isn't. If that's the case, if he's just voiced his opinion to the member on board, but that's not been passed on, it's kind of just like venting. So there's not a lot really anyone can do about that. But if that member of staff has pass that comment on to the steward or been asked to certainly pass that on to the steward, then if they're investigating at a time and they're getting pressure from the FIA president over what he feels the penalty should be, that is completely wrong and a very different subject to the one we just had there. So can't really talk about this too much until we know what comes out. The ethics committee look at all data. I imagine they interview the stewards as well. But like I say, it's not a good look for the FIA. It's a bad look for Mohammed Ben Sulayem, who's probably in a precarious position anyway. And I think it's going to have repercussions, if I'm honest, because I think the team's going to be demanding it. That's for sure. Then we come on to Alpine. I'm going to say Red Bull for last because they could have a whole podcast, couldn't they? So Alpine. So they've had everyone leave. Like we said, they've changed over to this McLaren-style structure of having a 3-tiered approach to their development, to their aerodynamics departments. I think they're just floundering. I think they look like a team who've got no direction. Bruno Famin doesn't strike me as someone who's got a clear plan in place, if I'm honest. You listen to his post-match, you listen to his post-race interviews and he doesn't come across as someone who's enthusiastic. I don't know whether that's just him, but he doesn't fill me with confidence that Alpine have got a way out of the mess that they're currently in. And make no mistake, they are currently in a mess. So I think that's the problem I've got with it at the moment. I don't see how Bruno Famin is an advancement on Otmar in terms of taking the team forward. He was good as an interim boss in terms of steadying the ship once Otmar went. I do think they missed the boat with someone like Binotto. There's talk that they could be going back to Binotto. There's even talk that Mike Elliott is on the radar for Alpine as well, as a rumour I saw yesterday. So he would be. Why wouldn't he be? From Mercedes to Alpine would work. But I think at the moment, I do think that the Alpine board is going to look at them in terms of their investment, what they're doing. Those investors who invested heavily last year, they're going to have a say in this. They're going to want to know what's happening to their money, what's happening to their stake, if that's being diluted by their on-track performances. They're going to want to know what the long-term plan is as well. So I think there's a lot more to come from Alpine this season. I think there's a lot of things rumbling. And I think that ultimately they're a team which needs to change the direction. And I'll keep banging on about it, but I think Andretti can provide it. Alpine can supply the engine. Andretti can take over Enstone and take over that main part of the factory in terms of the build, the design. They could come in straight away, just slap Andretti onto the car in terms of name, change colours over, you're good to go. They could even potentially run as Alpine for the rest of this year to save any sort of issue with that. So it might be that they're waiting for the year to finish. It might be that it's not viable for them. I don't see why it wouldn't be. That would also make sense for General Motors. They could come on board in 2028. They could either come on board like Ford have done in terms of, a partnership deal, or they could come in their own right, and then the Alpine team could go off into the sunset. So I think, like I said earlier, with the Concord Agreement coming into play, we know that once you sign up for the Concord Agreement, you're signed in for the amount of years that agreement is for. So I think Alpine will be looking hard at that. And I think Andretti will be looking to see if there's any leverage from any teams who may be doubtful going forward. So don't be surprised if we hear a bit more about that one. I think it's been on the cards for a while. I certainly said it last year. So I'm a firm believer that it's been on the cards for a while. So I don't think we've seen the last of Andretti in Formula One, that's for sure. I think this might just give them the route they need to get on the grid, and then they can make the changes they want to following on from that. And then we come on to Red Bull. This one needs a drink. So ironically, Red Bull's biggest challenge to Red Bull winning the Formula One championships this season is Red Bull. And what I mean by that is someone needs to get control of that team, and somebody somewhere needs to take the bull by the horns, excuse the pun, and rein in that team and sort it out, because ultimately they are a team in absolute free fall. No one has any idea what's going on. So we've heard all the rumours. We know that Christian Horner had an investigation hearing. We know that hearing subsequently said that any wrongdoing had been dismissed and that there was no further action to be taken against Christian Horner. We then know about the WhatsApp drive that was sent to all of the press. We don't know whether that drive is true or not. We've had no confirmation on that. A couple of things I want to say on this is, if it's the messages I've seen, they look very much a set of messages between two people. They're not a full picture. There are a lot of messages missing. It feels a bit invasive. It feels like they weren't made to be public. And I think that's the one thing we've got to remember, is at the end of all of this, there is a person who made an complaint against Christian Horner. There was somebody in that Red Bull team who felt strong enough to make that complaint against him because they didn't like the way they were treated. And no matter what we think about the evidence, no matter what we think about our personal view on this, that is ultimately a member of staff who felt so strongly about something that they came forward and reported that. And I think that's getting lost in the narrative that's being played with all these WhatsApp messages and things like that. I think that's what's getting missed, is actually there's a member of staff here who put their trust in the system, and in their eyes, certainly that trust hasn't been upheld. And I wonder the impacts of that in terms of what that's going to do for the sport going forward and people coming forward, because if they see it as this is what's going to happen, no one is ever going to come forward in the sport for any wrongdoing at all, because they will just get absolutely crucified by social media, which is just wrong. This should have been handled privately, confidentially, internally by Red Bull. In terms of the process, yes, they should have brought somebody externally in to overview it, but ultimately it should have been kept confidential, and it's not been done in that way whatsoever. And there's another party here which isn't being considered with all of these retweets, all of these messages, all of these stories, all of these allegations, and I think that's just wrong, and I think that needs to be brought back to the forefront. But ultimately, I do think it needs an end in sight one way or the other, for the good of the sport and for everyone involved to be able to get the help they need and then take the next steps that they need to on their own personal journey. So that's what I will say about it. Christian Horner, it feels like a power play. It feels like someone is definitely out to get Christian in terms of leaking the messages. If he did them, there's a consequence to it. But what I mean is the way that this is being played out. So I don't mean the content of the messages, and I don't mean the content of the allegation. What I mean is the fact that somebody somewhere has delivered this to the media feels very much like somebody doesn't want Christian Horner to remain in power in any way whatsoever. So it feels like Red Bull have got a power play being played out in public. Now, in terms of what that means for Max Verstappen, a lot of talk about Mercedes, a lot of unfounded talk, if I'm being honest. My views on this are quite simple. Red Bull are unravelling. Until someone can get a hold of it, they're in a spiral. We're hearing about Ford getting cold feet. We're hearing that Adrian can walk if Christian goes. We're hearing Max can walk if Helmut Marko goes. We're hearing all of these clauses that are in there. Now, what I will say is a long multi-year deal like Max Verstappen's with Red Bull will have clauses in there somewhere along the line. That much is guaranteed. That much is a sure given bet that in there will be clauses. What they are, we don't know. But they will certainly have some, especially when you consider how long he signed for and when he signed that contract with the amount of unknowns. Now, with regards to Jos talking to Toto, they go way back. I don't think there's anything more than that. I do think there's some truth in rumours of Max to Mercedes in the sense of I think that Max is sensibly keeping his options open. Now, Mercedes have got a seat for next year. They've got the financial power to buy Max Verstappen and to reward him and give him a better contract. They've got a Mercedes engine going in 2026. We know the engine freezes off. We know that Mercedes in the past have built some really good engines. This talk of their demise over the past couple of seasons, that's going to be a lot more diminished when they can get the engine performance back into play. Bear in mind, they've had an engine freeze for so long, and the reason that engine freeze was put in place was so everyone could catch up to Mercedes. So this thought of them not building this good engine, yes, they've lost some good people like anyone else in the current climate, but also they do know how to build a good engine. And if they can build an engine that covers over from their misgivings in terms of the aero package, then actually they're going to be a force to be reckoned with once again. So it remains to be seen what's going on. It remains to be seen whether or not, Max goes. I think he's just sensibly keeping his options open. I think that Mercedes are keeping all of their options open. They don't need to sign and drive it yet. They've got a sniff at Max, so they're keeping that door open. What you've got to remember is Max is one of probably 2 or 3 drivers on the Formula 1 grid, maybe even 4 drivers. But he's one of that crowd of people where actually, if you can get Max Verstappen in your car, you move heaven and earth to get Max Verstappen in your car. You will make sure that you can break the bank. You will make sure that if you can make it work, you make it work. And that's exactly what's happening here. I don't think it's anything more than that. I think it's an option in case they need it, in case something happens with Red Bull, in case they explode from within, in case all of these things do come true, and suddenly, Ford pull out, suddenly Adrian leaves, suddenly Christian goes. I think Max is kind of thinking to himself, well, actually, I need to make sure I've got an escape route here, because what if the new people coming in can't match up to what the previous team did? Or what if actually, the boards go one differently, the Red Bull sporting board, that is, and go, actually, we're going to sell the team. It's possible. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's very doubtful, but you never know. So it makes perfect sense that Max is keeping those options open, keeping that dialogue going. Toto is quite happy to do that. He knows that he can leave it as long as he wants to. The knock onto this is no one signing contracts, because no one signing contracts while Mercedes is on the grid. No one signing contracts while Mercedes and potentially Red Bull are now on the grid. So if you've got a driver who's going to sign a contract, that ain't happening anymore, because they're not going to bother with it. They're just going to say, no, do you know what? It needs to stay as it is. But that's where we are in the world of it. Red Bull, someone needs to get a grip of it. The PR team need to get a grip of it. They need to get one message, one clear message, get everything under control, but also feel that we're missing that there's an individual who works for a Formula 1 company who ultimately felt aggrieved enough to come forward in their allegations of inappropriate behaviour against their boss. And that is what's gone from this conversation now. In fact, there's very little talk of that now. It's all talk of leaked WhatsApp messages, what it means, power plays, everything else. And I just think we kind of need to rein it back to actually what was the issue here, and that issue wasn't solved in the sense of that person made that complaint, and we need to respect their wishes. We need to also understand what they want from this as well in terms of what their outcome looks like, because at the moment it's just wild speculation, and the mainstream media isn't helping. The mainstream media is using this for clickbaits. They're using it for stories. They're using any angle they can get. Jos Verstappen not in Saudi this weekend. Apparently he wasn't due to be there anyway, but suddenly it's a big story, isn't it? We saw it last weekend with the talk of Christian Horner missing the team principal press conference. Well, actually, he wasn't down to be at that team principal press conference, according to the FIA. So did he miss it? Or actually was it just that he arrived a day late because he didn't have any media commitments? And to be honest, he needed to sort this shit show out. So it's kind of like, I think there's too many people running away. All of these talk like Ford pulling out, they've not got sources. They're being retweeted. They're being just put out there. And it just needs to stop. And we need to stop forgetting about the stories that we need to remember, and the stories that we need to get to, like this allegation, this person who clearly won't have had the support that they need, won't have received the help they need, and actually is at the middle of all this and seeing all this played out can only be damaging for the sport, because why would anyone want to come forward with an allegation if this is how they're treated? And that in itself is a massive problem. And that, alongside Mohammed Ben Sulayem, potentially interfering with Formula 1, is really bad for the sport in terms of its future going forward. And those are the things that need to be looked at. And those are the stories that I feel personally need to be put at the forefront of what's going on within the sport currently. And then actually maybe we can get back to some on-track action. But with that in mind, I've talked for far too long this week. That's what I've got for this week. Let me know your thoughts on this one, as always, in the comments of the video, or drop me a message. Either way, like I said, if you haven't already, hit me up on all the social medias. I'm across all of them now. Just search F1 Coffee Corner and I should come up pretty much on every platform that you have. So any questions, any comments, drop them in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to share it if you like this. And I will see you all next week with our Saudi Arabia roundup, and hopefully some more news, but not as much news, if that makes sense. Catch you all next week.